the long line that snaked into the airport today here in Los Angeles. Okay, everybody was commenting that in this long line, everybody was so polite. Everybody was so kind.
Well, let me. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me, if I may.
So phenomenal. Sure, you may.
Thank you, sir. One religious leader said this yesterday, and I just want just react to it, okay? Here's the quote. It's from Jerry Falwell. I really believe that, he's talking about why this happened. He said, I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, the People for American Way, all of them who have tried to secularize America, I'd point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen. That's what he said. What do you say?
Oh, I don't want to interpret his comments. I can't relate to it in a spirit that would probably do justice, and I probably would have to. I'm not going there. I'm going to go to Jesus Christ because I'm a follower of Christ. And what's so shocking to me is that not only the Muslims, but many of my Jewish friends respect Jesus Christ. And if we see the God of love in him, let's focus on that. I do believe that our country is going to become strong as we come back to God and back to morality. I do think this is going to impact our culture. I think that it's going to impact the depravity that is in the culture, and that's, I think, that what Jerry was pointing to. But let's be positive. Let's come back to a faith that is positive and loving and caring, so that this caring compassion that we see all over America and in the world today. I have a global telecast, as you probably know, and I've been getting telephone calls from Holland. They're weeping on the telephone for us. And in Germany and in the Orient, the world is weeping tonight. And only people who have the capacity to love will weep the way they're weeping. And the world is sad. Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I thought you'd finished. I thought you'd finished. I apologize.
You've got to cut me off. I'm a preacher.
Well, then I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it very carefully and very gently, if you don't mind. Thank you for joining us. You can't fault me for trying to draw you into this discussion with Reverend Falwell. I gave it my best effort. It's nice to talk to you, sir.
Thank you.
Robert Schuller joined us from Los Angeles with his thoughts on how we might look at this theologically. We want, as we just clear the top of the hour, 2 minutes past the hour, update you on some of the latest developments. And first among them, the cockpit voice recorder, one of the black boxes on the plane that crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, has now been found. That's the voice recorder, and it has now been found. You might recall that that's the plane where it is speculated, at least, that the pilots, or the passengers rather, tried to overpower the hijackers, and it is possible we may learn something about why that plane went down from that black box. That's just coming in. Also late tonight, the Pentagon revised downward the number of people presumed dead in the crash at the Pentagon, down from 190 to 189. Anti-drop is good news. One person had been counted twice, as it turns out. Meanwhile, sources at the Pentagon tell us at least 4 Air Force fighter jets scrambled to intercept the hijacked passenger planes in the skies on Tuesday, of course, all arriving too late. And details are emerging about the first arrest stemming from the attacks. The Justice Department says the possible material witness was one of the people detained at Kennedy Airport yesterday has been arrested. More on that from our Justice Department correspondent, Kelly Arena. Kelly.
Aaron, 2 men in INS custody in Texas are being transported to New York City tonight for further questioning in the investigation of the terrorist incidents. Now, government sources say the 2 have been very helpful in moving the investigation forward, and they have detailed knowledge of the terrorist network. The men were taken into custody on Wednesday as they were traveling on an Amtrak train. The 2 had been traveling without legal identification and carrying box cutters. Now, that is the same type of weapon that the FBI device says was used by some of the hijackers. Now, it has been reported that the pair was traveling on Tuesday on a flight from Newark bound for San Antonio when the plane was grounded in St. Louis due to the hijackings. The men later got on a train bound for San Antonio. Now, that train was stopped on Wednesday by police request, and the pair was pulled off. Now, this development follows another in New York that we told you about earlier, where the first arrest has been made in direct connection to Tuesday's terrorist attacks. An individual who was detained at JFK Airport in New York is in custody on a material witness warrant. Now, what that is a material witness warrant is only issued when it can be demonstrated that there's information that is highly relevant to a criminal investigation and when there's a risk of flight. Law enforcement sources say to expect similar arrests in coming days. So very quickly, Aaron, we are seeing this investigation move forward.
Kelly, thanks. It does seem to be moving forward very quickly. All of this does, just in the hour that we've been on the air tonight. A number of things that have happened, including that. Thank you for your work again. Can we help me on this, guys? Has the House vote? The House is okay. The Senate earlier today voted on a use of force resolution, and there were no dissenting votes in the Senate. In the House tonight, the House has just now finished that vote, and we see one no vote. That column that says NV is non-voting or not voting. 388 yes on the use of force resolution. It's kind of a complicated technical legal document, and one vote against, and we'll try one Democrat. We know it's a Democrat. We don't yet know who. We'll figure that out in a moment or so, but that vote is now complete, and the president has the authorization he was seeking to essentially go after the people he believes are responsible for this and those who may have harbored them. That is very much shorthand for what that resolution allows the president to do. That vote just finishing up in the House now. Now, we take a break. That is to say, we take a break and turn things over to our colleague, Jeff Greenfield, our senior analyst who joins us here in New York with a number of guests and a number of conversations. Jeff.
Thank you, Aaron. Three things have been said almost from the moment that those towers went up. First, that America has changed forever. Second, that this is not the end of terrorist attacks. And third, that the only way to stop these attacks is to root out not only the terrorists, but the states that support them. We're going to be talking about that with three guests very knowledgeable in these fields. Judith Miller is an investigative reporter for the New York Times. She has written, among other things, about the world of Islam. Her most recent book, co-authored with two other New York Times reporters, is about germ warfare. Also with me in New York is Zev Chafetz. He is a columnist for the New York Daily News. He was for 30 years a resident of Israel and served for 5 years as director of the government press office in the prime ministership of Menachem Begin. Also in Washington with us is L. Paul Bremer. He served as ambassador at large for counterterrorism in the Reagan administration. He chaired what was the National Commission on Terrorism. He's now a senior advisor on politics and emerging risk for Marsh McLennan Incorporated. Mr. Bremer, I understand, just as a dark footnote, that many of your colleagues in that company are as yet unaccounted for. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. We are still missing many hundreds of our employees.
Well, words can't express what we feel about that, but let me turn to the larger issues, if I might. You wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal in which you said we must punish not just the terrorists, but any group or state that in any way supported them. I'd like to put some meat on the bones of that, if I might. Say the Taliban is protecting bin Laden and say he is found responsible for what happened. Pakistan provides assistance to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. China just signed an economic and development deal with the Taliban. How far do you mean that statement to go when you say we must punish any state that in any way supports the terrorists?
Well, I think in the case you give, we obviously would include the Taliban, and that's the primary target. Pakistan is in a difficult position, and if we understand what has been announced this afternoon, the Pakistanis have decided to join us in the campaign, whatever it's going to be, to root out terrorism in Afghanistan. With the Chinese, it seems to me, our position should be that we want them to cut off all relations with the Taliban at a minimum and to join us in our efforts to destroy terrorism in Afghanistan.
But by punishment, in the case of, let's say China does not do what you suggest, you are not, I take it, suggesting military action, but rather economic sanctions, other punishment short of force?
Look, the United States is going to have a strategy that operates on three different levels. There's the immediate level of what to do about bin Laden and the Taliban. There is another ring around that, which is the level where you go after, actively go after people who are actively supporting terrorists. I have in mind countries like Iran, Iraq, and particularly Syria, which still gives succor and safe haven to terrorists. And then you have outside that a broader ring, which is to try to build an international consensus that says terrorism is unacceptable. And the Chinese, in the case you posit, are in the third ring here. We want them to say it's no longer acceptable to have those kinds of relations with a government like that of the Taliban.
The question about Afghanistan, an Afghani writer living in San Francisco wrote an interesting column. He describes himself as somebody who hates the Taliban, hates Osama bin Laden. He suggests the Taliban, in effect, are an occupying hostile force in Afghanistan, that the people do not support them, that bombing will not work against a country that has successfully resisted everybody from the Brits to the Russians or the Soviets, and that the only way to really get him is to actually land ground forces in Afghanistan and wage a protracted war. Are you in agreement that that may have to happen if the United States is to do what you want?
I'm afraid I am in agreement. I think that is probably what is going to happen. It is true that the Taliban are not universally loved. They are all Pathans. The Pathans make up less than half the population in Afghanistan, and they're certainly not loved by the other tribes, particularly the tribes north of the Hindu Kush Mountains. So there is something to work with within Afghanistan, but it's not going to be enough to get rid of the Taliban. We're going to have to probably do that ourselves.
All right. Let me turn for a few minutes to Judith Miller. First, is there any doubt in your mind that what happened Tuesday is the work of Osama bin Laden? And can we say that, do you think, with some certainty?
Well, I think the administration, Jeff, has kind of said that. And beyond that, you know, since I'm not an intelligence agency, I think that certainly corresponded to my gut feeling about this.
Fair enough. So let me move on. One of the things that has been said again and again and again is this was a failure of intelligence, particularly the failure to use what is called human intelligence. We relied too much on electronic intercepts, relied too much on satellites. We needed people to infiltrate Osama bin Laden and his cohorts. On a difficulty scale of 1 to 10, how hard would that have been for us to have done that?
Oh, I think about a 9.5. I mean, it's Jerry knows this because he's lived and worked in Afghanistan in a previous life. But I have visited there, and this is extremely difficult country in which to work as a foreigner. And I think that what I saw from our Arab allies is that they were in a much better position to do that than American intelligence. I mean, blonde, blue-eyed American shows up and says, "Hi, I'm here with company X, Y, or Z, and I'm here to help you." And the Taliban immediately think, CIA. So this is not easy work.
But just to try to explore the complexity of this, if we were to turn to one of the moderate Arab states we consider allies, and ask them to go after Osama bin Laden, does that not put some risks on their shoulders, given the support for radical Islam in some of their own countries?
Well, I think it does, but I also think that the mood in those states has dramatically changed in the past 2 or 3 years.
How so?
Well, I think the Millennium bombing plot, the effort to ring in the new year in a, quote, Islamic way, that Osama bin Laden's networks attempted to stage, really galvanized a lot of American allies in the Middle East and showed them that if they didn't fight this kind of terror, they themselves would become the victims of it. I can only tell you that in previous articles that I've written, I worked very closely with some Middle Eastern intelligence officials who had rather good information about what Osama bin Laden was up to and his networks. And that information was enormously helpful in many cases to the Americans.
So the statement that we, the United States or the West, must root and branch terrorism and its supporters within the Arab world, within the Near East, within many other countries. I mean, it sounds as if what you're saying is, without the support of our Arab allies, without their wholehearted support, this is not this is a prescription that can't work.
I don't think you can do it without their wholehearted support, and that, in fact, is part of the problem. Wholehearted, because some of our Arab allies want to have things both ways. On one hand, they want to work with us quietly